Hey everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. Join me for another episode of Rock and Read. Today we will continue our trip through the book Red by the Red Rocker himself, Sammy Hagar. Y'all ain't ready for this. We're on Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is called CAPES. Here we go. Ed Matson taught me how to play guitar and drive a car. Ed was 3 years older and had gone to school with my brother. In high school, Ed had been this fat kid with a big nose. Everyone made fun of him and beat him up. His mother was a... She had about 10 houses in bad neighborhoods. She had 3 on the street where they lived in Fontana. I never met his father, who was a steel worker in Gary, Indiana. They didn't live together, and after meeting his mother, I could understand why. His mom was a Russian Jew and completely crazy. Then one day, Ed got a nose job in Hollywood, went on a diet, and lost tons of weight. His mother bought him a brand new 1962 Chevy Super Sport Impala. Soon, he was the coolest guy in town, and nobody knew who he was. And my brother didn't recognize him. He had this fabulous pompadour. He was going to Hollywood and having his hair razor cut by Jay Sebring, one of the guys that Charles Manson would eventually kill. His mom gave him money, and he always wore cool clothes. I used to see him driving around, usually by himself. He picked me up hitchhiking one time, and we became fast friends. He taught me how to drive. I had a learner's permit, and he let me drive everywhere. He took me to Sebring's salon and got my hair cut. He thought I was a young guy with some potential, and he wanted to help bring it out. He played guitar, and early on he was listening to Bob Dylan. Ed turned me on to the Beatles and the Stones. Before that, Elvis had been my first real hero, because my big sisters loved him so much. When I was a little kid, my sisters would have parties. They would dress me up, ducktail me out, and every one of those girls would dance with me. I dug the out of it. I was a little hard on, a 9-year-old kid with these girls 5 or 6 years older, starting to get sexy, starting to get little all because of Elvis. Even though I dug Elvis, I didn't pursue music. But the Beatles got to me. I was in high school, already had a girlfriend, but I still couldn't help liking I Wanna Hold Your Hand. When I heard the Stones, I was gone. Local top 40 DJ George Babcock brought the Rolling Stones to San Bernardino in June 1964 for the band's first concert in America, and I went. Ed Matson and I drove over in his car to the Swing Auditorium with the plan to sneak in. We stood at the back door when along comes this clunky up orange school bus, and George Babcock gets out of the bus with the Stones. They walked in the back door and we walked right in behind them. That was when it started for me. That night, I knew I wanted to be a musician. Ed Matson could already play guitar. I started singing with him, and we would play these Beatles and Stones songs. We knew 3 or 4 songs. Ed said we needed 2 guitars so he could play lead. By that time, my mom had a job and was doing okay, so I tried to con her into buying me a guitar on her Sears account. She told me that if I learned how to play Never on Sunday, the popular foreign film title track played on a bouzouki, on Ed's guitar, she would buy me a guitar. I learned it in like a day or 2. She bought it on time. It was $39.95, a Silvertone guitar and an amplifier and a case. My first band never played a gig, but we had CAPES. A couple of my pals and I helped paint a house for one of their fathers. We used the money to buy the fabric and talk one of the guys' mothers into making them. Black velvet, red lining, Dracula collars. We wore them around town one day, and people driving down the street would honk their horns and flip us off. We thought we were really cool. We decided we would wear them to the Dale Dance in Riverside, but we were too young to drive. We hitchhiked. Nobody was going to pick us up wearing those capes. So we rolled them up and put them on again when we got to the dance, only they wouldn't let us wear the capes into the dance, so we rolled them up again and stashed them outside in the bushes. When we came out, they were gone. Somebody stole them. My mother thought the whole thing was hilarious, and she never let me forget it. Years later, when she was interviewed for the local paper about me, she told them, "Oh, his first band, they had capes." Dick Dale was the thing. The king of the surf guitar moved his weekend dances from the rendezvous and Aragon ballrooms on the coast of the Inland Empire, and his weekly shows at the Riverside National Guard Armory were big events. When Ed Matson wanted to start a band, we called it the Fabulous Castiles and played surf music. I learned Dick Dale's Miseraloo on guitar. We never had a drummer in that band, and we all played through one amp with the microphones. We practiced every day. We met Jerry Martin, a 50s oldies but goodies doo-wop dude, but a good bass player. He was way above the level that Ed and I were playing at, but we thought we knew what was going on and would let us come over. I had started having long hair. I started wearing rock and roll looking clothing. To us, he had it made. He had a 50s band that would play nightclubs all over the Inland Empire and LA. He had his own house, drove a new T-Bird, and even had a single out that had played on the radio one time. He would play with us in his garage because he thought we were hip and on to the latest things. Soon he started growing his hair and getting hip himself, but I was still astonished when he pulled out a joint and said, "Hey, want to get high?" I smoked a little pin joint with him, but didn't feel anything. I was too nervous. It took a couple times. Once I discovered rock and roll, and I barely made it through high school, especially after I got my first guitar. I was done. I was flunking everything. My teachers would say, "Why don't you apply yourself?" That was high school. All I cared about was music and girls. And once I finally got high, it was really all over. One of my pals and I took a joint and drove way down the dirt road in the Jurupa Hills, almost to Riverside. I couldn't stop laughing. I couldn't drive. I couldn't do. I dug it. After I decided I was going to smoke dope, in order to get that dope, you had to find the lowlives of all lowlives. These were the dope dealers in Fontana. Not hippies, but bad guy heroin dealers. Those were the people you went to see if you wanted to buy some weed. It wasn't even good weed. So there I was, becoming a stoner, smoking dope every day, taking acid, even shooting speed. Shot heroin. Didn't dig it. After high school, I wanted to get out of Fontana as quickly as I could. Fontana was a blue-collar town. Nobody would have ambitions like being a doctor, a lawyer, or anything like that. You were either a badass, low-rider, Hell's Angel type, tough guy, or you got a regular job and got married immediately after high school. There were no plans of leaving that town. My father was the town drunk. He was living on the streets. I'd be driving my car around and there was my dad stumbling down the sidewalk, drunk. Every so often we'd bring him over to my sister Bobby's house and she would clean him up, but it would never last. Mom was doing much better. Not only did she have her own real job, she met a guy, Mike Majervovich. He was a big Russian bear who escaped the Ukraine after the Soviet army slaughtered his family while Mike hid in the basement with his baby. He ran away on foot and gave the baby to a couple in a village on his way. He made it to Canada where he worked in a coal mine and eventually moved to California. He was living in Cucamonga and working as a chef at Chaffey College when he met my mom at a polka dance. He was a good guy, although he didn't like my long hair and didn't mind letting me know. Still, he bought me my first car. I was getting ready to make my jump. I was aching to be a musician, but I worked at ABC stores in the automotive department. I wore my hair in a Bob Dylan afro and had this girlfriend, Christy Carson, who looked like Twiggy. I started living with her at her grandmother's house in San Bernardino. I bought a brand new black 1967 Volkswagen, $1,900 out the door, minus $300 trade-in, that my mom co-signed for and I was making payments. I talked the manager of the ABC store into opening a music department at the Riverside store, and I ran it. I ordered all the records. I started getting record players. I started stocking guitars. I built the whole music department. But I was doing drugs. I was smoking dope constantly. I was stoned all the time. I'd wake up in the morning and smoke roaches before I went to work. My friend Bucky was really into music, and he liked to play. He was a year older than me, but during the summer, we spent time together. I was always hanging around with tough guys, and Bucky was kind of a tough guy. I'd go over to Bucky's house. He had a swimming pool. I thought they were wealthy. Sometimes I would see his younger sister, Betsy, sitting around in a bikini. I knew her from high school, although she would never say hello to me in the halls. I was always tripping on her, but Bucky would say, "Don't mess with my sister, I'll kick your ass." Bucky would come over to the ABC store and buy these cardboard record filing boxes that sold for $1.39. Little cheap folders with A, B, C, D, etc. on them, and you put your records in there. Only, I would fill them up with new albums by Cream, Jimi Hendrix, all the stuff we wanted to hear, charge him for the filing box, put everything in a paper bag, and staple the receipt for $1.39 to the bag for the security guard to check on the way out the door. Sometimes I would slip in a new album by Donovan or Joan Baez for his sister. So this one time, Bucky's got the bag with about 20 pounds of records in it, and the security guard goes to grab it. The bag ripped to pieces. The box hit the ground, and all of these records went flying all over the place. They busted Buck. I got fired. They wanted to fire me anyway. They were watching me and knew I was smoking dope during the lunch hour, but that wasn't all bad. I went on unemployment. I was getting high all the time and playing guitar. I knew this small-time dope dealer in Fontana named Jim, and one day he asked me to drive him to San Francisco to score some LSD and go to this big rock festival in June 1967. I had the car. We drove up to Hyde-Ashbury and arrived about 4 in the morning. We crashed in the car on the street. When we got up, Jim knocked on the door and went into this apartment full of speed freaks. I watched as some guy shot speed in his neck. I was not digging the scene, but Jim scored a bag of window pane acid. We dropped the acid bright and early in the morning and drove down to the Monterey Pop Festival, stoned out of our minds. The concert took place inside a fenced-in area surrounded by a park. Thousands of people were hanging around outside. I spent most of the time out in the park outside the arena. Everyone was sitting under the trees, taking drugs, smoking pot, burning incense, having sex in the grass. We saw Brian Jones wandering around, as stoned as we were. We saw some of the bands. We caught Otis Redding. I saw Eric Burdon and the New Animals, who blew my mind. Hugh Maskell was cool. I saw weird things like the Association, who had great harmonies, but I missed Hendrix. I didn't see Janis Joplin either. I was high on acid for 3 days. All that left a big impression on me, but it was when Bucky introduced me to fresh cream that I decided that's what I was going to do. I hadn't had a job in a bit, and I had been spending my time getting high every day. I had been listening to the Paul Butterfield blues bands East West, and of course, everyone dug Sgt. Pepper's, but not really trying to play anything, just tripping. But then Cream came out with their first album, and all of a sudden, I've got to get back into music. Way back. I wasn't just tripping anymore. I went and stole a guitar. Actually, a friend of mine stole it. He knew about the guitar and where it was. We watched and waited for the people to leave their house, and we climbed through their back window. My friend did it because he believed I was going to be a rock star. I already looked like one. Another one of my doper friends, Tim Tomiko, who had a real job at Kaiser Steel, signed for me to buy an amplifier, a Fender Bassman, because that's what Eric Clapton used to get a big, fat tone. I set my sights on becoming Eric Clapton. I wanted to see Cream play that September at the Whiskey A Go-Go on the Sunset Strip, and I thought I made eye contact with Eric Clapton. I thought he looked right at me. I looked just like him. I wore my hair in a big natural afro like his. It was before he had his long, wavy hair. I had the exact same look. The next month, I went over to see this band I had heard about. They already had a lead singer who played guitar, and he was pretty good, so I went to check him out. I walked in wearing a pinstripe double-breasted jacket with a roach clip on my lapel, white t-shirt, jeans, boots, John Lennon shades, and my frizzy afro hairdo. The band's guitarist, who was named Jesse Lamas, took one look at me and said, "Can you sing?" Just like that, I was the new singer for the Mobile Home Blues Band. Jesse and I were pretty much opposites. He was this fat, greasy-looking Mexican slob who didn't even tie his shoes but could really play. Well, I looked the part, but had little else. Jesse knew what was happening and turned me on to Jeff Beck. He worked at this cool little record store between Colton and San Bernardino, where he bought an import single of Rock My Pilm Soul, and on the other side, Hi Ho Silver Lining. Jesse played me Red House and Manic Depression off the English version of the first Jimi Hendrix album. The Mobile Home Blues Band was a weird band. We only did 10 gigs or something, but we rehearsed for what seemed like forever. The highlight, if you could call it that, was when we opened for American Breed, remember Bend Me, Shape Me, at this crazy non-alcoholic club called Purple Haze in Riverside. Our bass player, Benny Musteller, was a little genius in a wheelchair. He was born with this rare disease, all crippled up. His joints were fused together. When he was about 14 years old, he had an operation, and they just cut out his joints, or at least he could straighten out. He played a Hofner bass, just like Paul McCartney. He was right-handed, but he had to play left-handed because of the operation, and he was great. He was a brain, too. He would tell everybody what key and what notes to play. He had long hair, and he was really up-looking from spending life in a wheelchair. But he was a math genius in school, and he played perfect. Perfect time, perfect note choices. His mother was the greatest woman. She was a single mom, and Benny had a totally normal brother, too. His mom would feed us and let us rehearse in their garage. She would pick Benny up, take him out of the wheelchair when he had to go to the bathroom. She would wipe his butt for him and everything. She was the sweetest woman, and she loved us because we didn't care that he was all up. She put up with us bringing girls over all the time. The drummer was a 14-year-old kid who didn't even have his first drum set yet. His name was David Losser, but Jesse called him Bro. 40 years later, he is still my drummer. We had a rhythm guitar player, and the first time we played a gig, he freaked out. He was shaking so badly, he couldn't play. He had to play behind his amp. He couldn't even come out on stage, and we kept him in the band. I was just the singer in the band. I was doing too many drugs. I'd gotten in the habit of going over to Tim Tomiko's house to smoke pot. Every now and then I'd buy a lid and deal joints. I'd go over to Tim's house and act like I was cool, because I was trying to be a rock star now. It was a scene. There was always music going. I'd play guitar, and he'd let me leave my amp there. He would always have joints or acid or speed, and people were constantly coming and going. Guys would be shooting up speed. I came in one night late. Everybody was smoking dope. I had a couple joints. I lit one and passed it around. This one guy said, "Hey man, do you mind if I have this to go?" A roach? I didn't think anything of it. "No, it's cool." This random guy turned out to be a narc. They were trying to get the big dealer, whoever that was. There was no big dealer in our world. We were all dealing joints, not kilos. If I had $85, I would have bought a kilo in a second, but I never had $85. Still, I didn't realize what I had done until about 3 months later, when a cop pulled me over and gave me a ticket for an illegal lane change. It was such BS that I went to court to fight it. When the judge asked me how I pleaded, I said, "Not guilty." "And how do you plead to the charges of possession?" "No, distribution of marijuana," he said. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. I had no idea what he was talking about. Then this narc walks in holding a plastic bag with my joint. It turned out that our pal Jim had been busted and rolled over on everybody else. They threw me in jail. In the middle of the night, some guy in my cell pulls a baggie with 2 joints out of his hole and fires up right there in jail. It freaked me out. "I'm in for this, you mother," I said. "They don't care," he said, and I knew he was right. We toked up. Nothing made sense. It was not a good trip. I stopped smoking dope after that, because getting high in jail bummed me out so bad. There was some enormous in the next cell for writing bad checks. "You got a girlfriend?" he says. "She's Jody right now, man. He's her in the she's him." Some other old jail guys chimed in. They were dogging me heavy, and they were getting to me. It was the worst 4 days of my life. My mom was bumming hard. My brother and my sister visited me. Everybody's going, "Oh, Sammy, how could you do this? When you get out, you're going to cut your hair and go straight," and all this. When I finally went to court, I didn't have an attorney, so they gave me a public defender. When we eventually did appear in court, it turned out that I had worked with the bailiff at the ABC store when he had been working as a security guard. He recognized me, took the judge aside, and told him I was a nice kid, a hard worker. There must be some mistake. The judge let me off. It was a lucky break. I could have done time. So I got out of jail, and I decided no more dope. I'm playing music. I'm getting rid of all those friends. Quitting all that around Tim Tamiko's house. I stopped making payments on my aunt because I didn't have any money, and there was still $80 left to go. Tim paid it off. I went in like a year later, and they told me it had been taken care of. I never saw Tim again. He got busted too, only he went to prison. Me, I never worked another day in my life. Well, that's the end of Chapter 2. Let me know what you guys thought of Chapter 2 in the comments below. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Till then, rock on.